Today we're going to talk about a new little factoid that boiled up as I was on my way out here. Youth unemployment in China is now higher in percentage terms than it is in Italy. Italy being probably the most moribund economy in Europe and generally the one with the worst economic profile. Average economic growth out of Italy has averaged over the last 20 years, 25 years to be negative. And to have China facing a similar situation with employment is a very, very bad sign. Let's break this down from a manufacturing point of view because that's really where this all hits. Number one, everyone's reshoring. Investment is flowing out of the country. Even Chinese companies are moving. So that is a huge hit to the engineering model and the manufacturing model, because if you have a huge amount of unemployment already, that would normally say that you should be pushing down labor costs to make your jobs more competitive, your economy more competitive. That is not happening because, number two, young people in China don't want to work in manufacturing. They want to work in information technology jobs. They want to work in the knowledge economy. But that brings us to the third problem, is that China sucks at those things. One of the things that allows you to have a meaningful knowledge-based economy is you have to allow your people to think. And when you've got a state that specifically cracks down on any sort of independent discourse on anything, and has now reached to the point that foreigners can't even access economic data like weather data, you cannot possibly train up a mass employment system where everyone is capable of value-added knowledge work. So more and more people don't want to do the manufacturing work. At the same time, more and more foreigners don't want to do the manufacturing work in China. At the same time that the labor force is no longer right-skilled for what the Chinese are actually decent at. And I would argue that the Chinese aren't even all that decent at manufacturing anymore because the cost of labor keeps going up. Remember, this is a country that is in a demographic bomb. Okay, so that kind of all of that is phase one. Phase two is that you should expect all of this to get significantly worse with no chance of getting better. Chairman Xi has created a cult of personality that is one of the strictest in human history. He absolutely has more power into his person than any Chinese leader in history, and arguably even more than, say, the Roman empires of old. You've got a population that doesn't want to do the work that their economy is designed for and that their infrastructure is designed for, and Xi is ensuring that the labor force will never be able to evolve in a more productive direction that is more value-added and more knowledge-based. This is just what the Chinese system happens to look like now. But third, and perhaps most importantly, and maybe a little sexy, is the last time the Chinese had this sort of disconnect between labor quality and the economic structure of the economy overall. You had a lot of very young people who thought they were going into the knowledge businesses, who suddenly discovered those jobs were never going to be available, and they got together and they went on a long walk together and they had some protests. Now in China, this has been suppressed, but the rest of the world knows this as the Tiananmen Square protest that ultimately led to the massacres around 1989 to 1992, triggering the change in the political system that has proceeded until now. Only this time, instead of having a number of factions within the Chinese system who can come together with a compromise system to play it forward, led by, at the time, Deng Xiaoping, this time anyone who has any independent power has been utterly destroyed by Chairman Xi Jinping. So if we do get a break because of this, this is it. This is the end. Now, I've always believed that this was going to be the last decade of the Chinese system, but the degree of narcissistic myopia that we are seeing out of Beijing really has gotten to just massive levels. And now that we're having massive disconnects within the employment system, it's only a matter of time before that translates into massive disconnects in the economic system as a whole, and that cannot happen without a political after effect. I don't want to suggest that this is the end, but this is how ends begin. Where is this ridiculous idea of a COVID recovery for the Chinese? I mean, come on, it's been 6 months. I would argue that you really shouldn't wait for it any longer. There's a number of things that are going on that are structural for the Chinese system that aren't going to fix by anything as minor as reopening. Most Chinese economic growth has been caused over the years by either investment in industrial plant to serve external markets or the production of goods to serve those external markets. So basically think of offshoring, onshoring. That has been a lot of the growth story, and especially the technological advance for these past 20 years. That has probably peaked. A few things. Number one, the world, and especially the United States, has turned sharply anti-Chinese when it comes to investments. And so there's a lot more effort to do things with friends or at home or at least nearby. Biggest beneficiaries of that so far have not just been the United States, but Mexico and Vietnam. Nothing's changing there. Second, the production costs in the United States' system in terms of energy and labor productivity, everything are lower than they are in China. So there are very, very few industries that have tried to move out of China back to the United States and discovered that it's been anything other than a wondrous experience. And third, there's a personnel angle here. When you're going to drop $1 billion in a country in order to do a big investment, you kind of go and scout it around first. And because of COVID, no American CEOs went to the country for the entirety of calendar year 2020, 2021, or 2022. If they did, they were subjected to the joys of literally an anal probe to check them for COVID. We like to call this in economic parlance a non-tariff barrier. Well, the average turnover for an American CEO is 5 years. And if for 3.5 years you couldn't even get there, well, the personal connection where CEOs would link their personal performance professionally to some sort of activity in China, well, that's all gone. And so we've seen interest at the corporate level drop as well. On top of that, it's turning out that the Chinese demographic picture is significantly worse than anyone thought. Worse than the Chinese thought. And it's not so much that the Chinese population became older than the average American in 2018 and was passed by the Indian population in 2022, but those milestones probably happened a decade ago if you look at the new data that's coming out of the Chinese. So the economic case isn't there. The personal case isn't there. The investment case isn't there. And that's before you consider the Chinese have kind of become a bag of dicks in international diplomacy. This whole wolf warrior approach has soured a lot of people and made it less likely for Chinese tourists to be welcomed and less likely for countries to be interested in seeking that at all. So when you look at flights in and out of China to other countries, the global average is only about 40 to 50% of pre-pandemic levels. So there hasn't been that kind of burst of revenge tourism that we've seen in a lot of places. And flights to and from the United States, where the business is done, that's only 6% of pre-COVID levels. So we've had a significant shift of mindsets on all sides. And with the demographic collapse, meaning that consumption-led growth was never possible again in China at bulk anyway, it really shouldn't be a surprise that the Chinese are proving unable to have a post-COVID bump, which means we're very close to a post-COVID slide, assuming nothing else goes wrong, and a lot of other things are going wrong. All right. See if I have another delay here in a bit.
Finally boarded. Oh, yeah. One more thing. We don't know how many people... Hi! We don't know how many people died in China's COVID experience, so assuming that the anti-vaxxers are right and this has never been worse than a common cold, that was 1 million people. Dead people don't spend money. People who survive dead people tend to be kind of down in the dumps for a little bit of time. So the idea that there was ever going to be a big economic boom as China opened kind of flies in the face of, logic and emotion, and demographics and trade and a few other things. Anyway, I'm finally moving now. See you from home.